Haven't got it. Haven't got it anymore. See, you know when you've lost it as a lecturer when you stand up at the front of the classroom and nobody is quiet. Great, so I'm Mary Ryan, I'm Vice-Provost for Research and Enterprise. On behalf of President Hugh Brady, I'm delighted to welcome you all here today. Just a couple of moments of housekeeping before we get started. One, we are not expecting any fire alarms. So if the fire alarms do go off, please go back out, preferably the way you came, and the muster point is on Exhibition Road. If not, there are exits at the back, and maybe follow somebody with an Imperial badge to bring yourself back around. Restrooms are just along the main entrance here to the left. And just to note, we are recording this session and we are live streaming. It will be available later for people to watch back. Having said that, we really want you all to engage in this event. There's going to be some Q&A later, so please, as we're going through, if you've got some burning questions, please do join in the panel session later. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Imperial College London. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion on the shared goal of creating a global sustainable food system and the crucial role that sustainable proteins will play in that future. We're holding this event today, the first day of London Climate Action Week. It's a week to celebrate the progress that we've been making towards a sustainable future, but also a week where we take stock and challenge ourselves to fully engage in addressing the urgent climate issues, finding solutions to complex challenges, and translating them for the benefit of global society. It's what Imperial has always been about since its founding, and it's what the ambitious Bezos Earth Fund was set up to achieve. With this in mind, I'm also pleased to welcome our co-hosts for this event from the Earth Fund, Sir Andrew Steer, President and CEO, and Dr Andy Jarvis, Director of Future of Food within the fund. So the food that we eat is the cornerstone of our societies, deeply embedded in our cultures and our way of life. We know the impacts of climate change are going to disrupt food systems on which we rely, and we know that we need to build across all resources a more resilient future. We also know that current food systems come at large environmental costs. The way that we produce, transport, and dispose of food is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, responsible for up to a third of global emissions. And we're going to hear a lot more about that, both in our keynote and in the panel later. Quite simply, there is no path to a sustainable zero-pollution world without sustainable food at its heart. The environmental need for action is urgent, but this cannot be separated from the challenge of food security or food insecurity that is experienced by millions of people around the world. So we're faced with this double threat. Our food systems are both uniquely vulnerable and uniquely causing the climate crisis. So big challenges require big solutions, and they require new ways of thinking. Imperial's new strategy highlights climate, energy, and sustainability, and the interactions between those themes as being critical and an area that requires scalable and holistic systems-based solutions. It's a challenge that cuts across traditional academic disciplines within Imperial and requires us to partner much more closely with government and industry and third sector parties. So Imperial for a long time has been a pioneer in the field of engineering biology, sometimes known as synthetic biology. That includes our fundamental pioneering research, but also developing really state-of-the-art facilities, thinking hard and enabling translation, and engaging directly in the education of the next generation to drive forward these skills. The impact of engineering biology is already seen and has been transformative in sectors such as healthcare, and we're now looking to see how can it be equally transformative for the future of food. We also know that we need to accelerate the journey from these fundamental discoveries to reach real-world application quickly. The new School of Convergent Science in Future Sustainability that we're about to launch will provide Imperial with a new way to engage with all of our partners across industry, policy, philanthropy, and to act as a catalyst to drive forward new solutions. So we're delighted to be co-hosting this event today with the Bezos Earth Fund. We're going to be hearing from Sir Andrew in a moment, and then from our keynote speaker, Henry Dimbleby. We also will have a panel discussion, at which point there will be a chance for some audience Q&A, and we have a really illustrious set of panelists for you to challenge. I talked about celebrating and challenging, so I'm looking forward to doing that. But without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Sir Andrew Steer to the stage. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mary. Welcome, everybody. This is such a treat. My goodness me, the beginning of Climate Week with a big announcement here that will change the world. I'm pleased to announce $30 million to start the Bezos Center for Sustainable Proteins at Imperial College London. So why Imperial? Well, you're the best in the country, the best in Europe, and second best in the world. But I think they got that wrong. In this room and in this institution are some of the biggest brains on the planet, driving forward amazing advances in science and technology that will change the world. But it's not just because you're brilliant at research. We picked you after an extremely rigorous global search, looking at 40 different leading institutions. It's because you combine that research with incubation of institutions and startup companies that actually will take that science, drive it into the marketplace, change behavior, and drive down the damage that is currently being done. So why sustainable proteins from the Bezos Earth Fund? Well, the Bezos Earth Fund, by the way, Jeff Bezos, you've heard of him, he put $10 billion on the table to be provided as grants this decade to address nature and climate problems. Why sustainable proteins? Is because livestock is damaging in a very serious way biodiversity and nature, and also, as Mary said, causing 1/3 of all, well, food and agriculture, 1/3 of all of the greenhouse gases. Of that 1/3, half of that amount is from livestock. Now, our goal is not to turn everybody into vegetarians. It's that if that number were to increase as it currently is, and remember that given income growth and population growth, consumption of meat is predicted to double by 2050. If that were to happen, goodbye to the Amazon, massive extinction, and absolutely no chance of achieving a 1.5-degree world. So that's the reason. Remember that livestock account for, 75% of all agricultural land. Remember that since 1970, humans have doubled, and the population of all other vertebrates has halved. Think about that for a moment. Think about the fact that 96% of all of the weight, all of the volume of all the mammals in the world, 96% is either farmed animals or human beings. Only 4% of the total weight of mammals is actually wild animals now. We haven't got it right. So we're not turning everybody into vegetarians, but we are trying to improve the choice and the health and the vitality of the agricultural system. Now, some people say, oh, well, this will hurt farmers. No, it won't. You still need farmers if it's plant-based, if it's fermented, and even if it's lab-produced. And we're going to be aiming for all three of those technologies, seeking to drive down costs, improve tastes, and to create something that is much, much less damaging. Protein from vegetables and plants uses 1/20th of the land, emits 1/20th of the greenhouse gases, and uses 1/20th of the water as meat-based equivalent amounts of protein. we believe something is going to go on over the next 20 years that is going to be remarkable, analogous to renewable energy. You know, since Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House in 1979, the cost of solar panels has fallen by 99.7%. And what we're going to see over the next 20 years is the price of alternative proteins coming down in the same way. So we have a much healthier agricultural system, much healthier society, a much greener society, and altogether a good thing. So this is a fantastic adventure we're embarked upon. And I would now like to ask someone who knows much more about this than I do, Dr. Andy Jarvis, who is our Director of the Future of Food, who is going to come and say a few words. Thank you very much indeed.
So 3 weeks ago, we launched our first Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein, and there I had to follow Andrew as well. And I didn't learn the lesson there. You should never follow Andrew's steer. His notes are even briefer than mine, and he always delivers an amazing address, right? I mean, it couldn't be more of a pleasure for me to be up here. This has been over a year in the making, coming to this point of launching these centers, and it's really still just the start of a journey. But it all started with a conversation with Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez, and we were talking about the issue of sustainable protein. And we came up with the idea of establishing these centers, these R&D centers, to support the whole sector as a fledgling industry, but move it to universities, open access R&D. And we had the conversation with them, and Jeff's words were, go to the very best. He said, go to the creme de la creme, excuse the dairy pun. Go to the best universities and let's set up centers that are going to support the sector, but also drive through some of the really the state-of-the-art research that will make the breakthroughs to bring alternative proteins to where they need to be. So that's where it all started. As Andrew mentioned, we went to dozens of universities looking at potential candidates. We had an open call. We had many great universities apply. One of the things we learned from that process is there is tremendous capacity out there in universities to deliver research on this, which is going to be transformational. And there's very little money going to support that. So that's one of the things that we learned just in the process to get here. But we were thrilled to see Imperial's proposal for this center. And we see this as meeting so many of the points that we want for these centers, the vision for these, right? We want them to be multidisciplinary. And if you look at history, scientific breakthroughs, the vast majority of the biggest scientific breakthroughs have happened when disciplines come together, when two different ways of thinking are combined to create new knowledge. That's very much what one of the points with this center. It's focusing in on engineering biology, where we're bringing engineering approaches to solve biological problems. So I don't think Andrew mentioned the 200 million proteins that there are in the world. Just our body, we have 100,000 different types of protein in our body. What are plants made of? Well, they're made of fats, sugars, minerals, many different compounds. What are meats made of? Well, fats, sugars, many compounds, and proteins. And so there is no reason why we can't find new ways to combine those ingredients, to redesign, re-engineer proteins to be delivering all of the characteristics that we need to develop an alternative protein that looks like meat, tastes like meat, smells like meat, and comes in at a price that is equal or better. So this is really an R&D problem. We can redesign proteins in a way that will deliver that. And this approach of engineering biology we see as potentially transformational. Second thing that we were most interested in with these centers is these are not grants to universities for professors to go out and do their thing, publish a paper, and then look for the next grant. This is the Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein over 5 years, responding to the needs of the sector. What we need is the sector to be telling the university professors, working with the university, saying these are some of the challenges that we have. This is what we need to overcome. This is the stuff that will bring those prices down, boost the taste, and improve the health benefits of these products. So Imperial is sat, especially at the White City campus around there, with an incredible food tech industry that is starting up in London, and a corridor of technology and food system partners and companies who are setting that agenda, saying these are some of the things we need. And here in Europe, in a continent which is absolutely critical as well for, and is at the forefront of these products at the moment. So we were fascinated by Imperial as this ecosystem. And so the ultimate objective with these centers really is responding to demand. It's doing cutting edge transformational research. And what we want with this is to reduce price. We need to reduce the price. These products will no longer need to be sat on shelves as a kind of premium product. They need to be there competing with meat and dairy products at a similar price. They need to be tasting the same, have the right texture, have the same environment. Food is culture, food is life. These products need to be delivering something which pleases consumers. They need that consumer acceptance is critical. And we need to do it in a way where we're not relying on too much fat or too much sugars or too much processing or too much salt to deliver that. We need to be delivering products which are lower on processing, that are healthy for people and planet. So many people think, well, $30 million, that's a lot of money. It's not an insignificant amount of money. We're very proud to be providing $30 million to the center, but it's really a drop in the ocean of the big food system and the numbers that we're facing, right? So if you look at all of the history of alternative proteins, they've received $13 billion of funding, more or less. That's been the size of the alternative protein sector. That's in all of time. That's primarily over the last 10, 15, 20 years. $13 billion, right? Over 80, 90% of that has come from the private sector. So it's venture capital, it's money that's flown in, especially under the pandemic. That was where you saw this big boost. Right now it's going down significantly, right? But it's $13 billion, mainly private sector. If we look at animal agriculture, there has been over $100 billion going into animal agriculture from governments for support, subsidies, over $100 billion every single year. So that means in 1 month, with subsidies and government support, you're paying for all-time investment in alternative protein. So by the time we hit, what's the date today, 24th of June, 24th of July, we'll have spent the same amount of money across the globe on animal agriculture as we have of all time in alternative proteins, right? So that's not a level playing field. And so one of the calls that we have is we talk about this yes and food system. A yes and food system is one that is recognizing the importance of animal agriculture and livestock-based products. And yes, we need to make that more sustainable. And it's looking at alternatives to that and alternative proteins. So when you have a yes and, part of a yes and food system is also having a level playing field. And so that's our call is, you know, this is $30 million. It's a drop in the ocean in terms of what this sector really needs to be successful. And so we call very much on governments to support this. This is absolutely critical. So the way we see it is you can't fix climate and nature without looking at food. As Andrew said, it's a huge portion of emissions. It's a massive land footprint. So we can't fix climate and nature unless we have a critical look at food. And you can't fix the food system unless we have a critical look at sustainable protein. Protein is at the heart of that agenda. And there's no scenario where we can meet Paris goals, nature goals, without alternative proteins playing a part. And so that's why we're interested in this. That's why we're super excited of being at Imperial. And this is just the start of a journey now to really bring about step change in the quality, the price, and the health benefits of these products. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for those kind and inspiring words. And also, you really know your audience. Imperial audience loves data, statistics. I would really like to thank the Bezos Earth Fund for their generous funding and support on behalf of the whole of Imperial. I know when you came to visit you told me that you're not in the business of funding good universities to be good universities. You're in the business of funding impact and places that will make a difference. And we are delighted that you chose us to partner with you on this journey. We would also like to acknowledge the supporters and partners who have supported us in this process, and Rodrigo will talk a little bit more about the partners of the bid. Any program like this is the result of a lot of teamwork, and many people came together really with a shared ambition and passion to try to deliver this centre. And you're going to hear a little bit more about it. So it is a teamwork, but somebody is responsible for delivering on this giant proposal and the challenge. So I would really, one, like to congratulate Rodrigo, but invite Dr. Rodrigo Ledesma Amaro, who's going to be the director of the Centre for Sustainable Protein, to come and say a few words.
Thank you, Mary. I'm really looking forward to tell you everything about this Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein, but I'm afraid you're going to need to wait until the discussion panel. What I'm going to do now is, on behalf of the center, to acknowledge a few people and organizations that help us to be here today. So I would like to start by thanking the Bezos Earth Fund. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andy, for your generous funding, for trust and support. I would like to also thank the Good Food Institute, DFI, for all the professionalism during the bid coordination, for all the interaction we have since then, and all the interaction we're going to keep having in the future, that I know they're going to be many and very fruitful. I would like to also thank Jeremy Coller for his several letters of support, and also Barbara Nave from BSF. I would like to thank more widely all the stakeholders and partners who help us to be here and show them support on the preparation of this proposal. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to working with you all. And I have a few shout-outs as well for internal people, and I would like to thank Professor Hugh Brady, our president, who sadly is not here today, and Mary Ryan for being advocates of sustainability at the college level. I would like to extend my acknowledgements to the Department of Bioengineering, to Professor Riley Green, and Calypso. Calypso, you've been amazing. I would like to also thank, of course, the vice directors of the center, Professor Karen Polizzi, who is joining us online. Hi, Karen. She's in Japan in a conference, and Professor Paul Freeman, who is here in the audience and who will be around for the showcase later today, so you can talk to him. I would like to acknowledge as well all the co-investigators of the proposal and the center, all the members of the RLA lab, the colleagues from the Center for Synthetic Biology, and all the partners, institutions, and universities at Aberystwyth, Reading, UCL, Kent, NIAP, Greenwich, National University of Singapore, Tufts University, and DTU. And what made me super excited about being here today is that this is the launch event, which means that tomorrow, or even from today at 7 p.m., we can start implementing all the vision and strategy of the center. And, and this is something that we've been discussing deeply for a year now, and it's been a year. And while we were having all this conversation and brainstorming about how we can disrupt the food system, and we were cooking this vision of the center, my partner Kathy was also cooking our daughter, who was born just 2 weeks before I had to submit the proposal. So thank you as well. It was a busy year, but the best year. And finally, I would like to thank everyone who's here today, either in person or online, and also the organizer of the event, Meredith and Terry and the team. And with that, I would like to call to the stage Henry Dimbleby, who is going to give the keynote talks. He's author of the Natural Food Strategy and also co-founder of Leon. Henry, I know you're ready.
Thank you very much indeed. For those of you who don't know what the National Food Strategy was, basically we'd left the EU, Michael Gove and DEFRA had decided to put in place to change the way we delivered CAP money to encourage a more environmentally friendly farming system rather than paying people to hold land. And he was being attacked from many sides, from people saying, what about health? You can't eat butterflies. Like, we need to look at this in the round. And he brought me in to do some work basically to set out how can we create a food system that not only provides enough nutritious calories, but also restores nature, sequesters carbon, and is distributed fairly among people from different demographics. I did that work for 2 years. During that time, we had COVID, and we flipped the team to work out how you could get food from restaurants, 25% of calories were out of home, into homes, and from in-town big supermarkets to corner stores, because that's where people ended shopping. We suspended competition law. It was the most fascinating insight into the workings of the food system, which it turned out, although one of the most miraculous, innovative, and destructive industries on earth, when you want to shift it, if you have a will, you can shift it. Everyone was worried that we were going to have to ration during COVID, and we saw that with the right incentives, all of the parts came together and meant that with the exception of some panic buying, actually we managed to feed everyone in this country with almost no break in supply. So what can I say today that hasn't been said already about alternative protein? The first thing I want to say is just to reinforce how important the food system transition is to society. I see really there being two big transitions we have to go through. One is the energy and transport transition, and the other is the food transition. The food system is by far the biggest cause of biodiversity collapse. It's by far the biggest cause of water stress, of water pollution, of soil degradation, of deforestation, of the collapse of aquatic life. And as you've heard, after energy, it's the second biggest cause of climate change, a third of global emissions. And actually that means that the way we eat is imperiling the way we eat, because if you look at UN and NASA forecasts of how food yields, crop yields might change over time with a 2.5 to 3% temperature increase, what you basically see is that wheat yields in the northern hemisphere are projected to increase. Wheat loves water, it loves warm temperature, and it loves carbon dioxide. So notwithstanding the occasional floods, actually we think wheat yields in the northern hemisphere are going to increase. But corn and rice yields in the equatorial zone and the southern hemisphere are forecast to fall and fall sharply. And when you look at a chart of that, it reminds me of what the food system, what people were worrying about the food system after the Second World War, when we thought, my God, there are 2.8 billion people, there are about to be 8 billion people, we're not going to be able to produce enough food to feed them. That was the concern then. And I see those charts of global yields, and I think that to me looks like wars of resources, it looks like mass migration, and it looks like malnutrition on a vast scale. And this really has only been recognized in the last few years. So at Glasgow COP, for example, supposedly the biodiversity COP, this was the COP that was all about biodiversity, food wasn't even mentioned. People were interested in food, were kind of hobbling about in pubs on the outskirts of the central piece. In Dubai, that wasn't the same. I think that one of the great things that's happened since Glasgow is that biodiversity is now being linked with food, with carbon, and as an inseparable and necessary other part of the equation. And the other is that food is being considered as one of the great transitions. And at the heart of that transition, a heuristic almost for the environmental transition, is that we have to eat less meat. And Andrew gave the numbers, but to give you a graphical size of the way in which meat production has overtaken our environment, this chart here from the food strategy shows on the left-hand side the population of the planet, about 2.5 million people in 10,000 BC, which those of you in this room will know was the beginning of the Holocene, the beginning of the period of stable climate that enabled us to farm. Farming enabled us to produce a surplus, which enabled us to create civilization. Those 2.5 million people learned how to farm at the beginning of the Holocene, and they were dwarfed at the time by wild animals. If you fast forward today, wild animals have collapsed. That was originally due to our enthusiastic hunting of megafauna, but more recently it continues. So, for example, the World Wildlife Report in 2022 estimated that since 1970, wild populations have decreased by over 60%. So even in modern times, and this is a problem of diminishing baseline, we don't realize, if you go back and you read the descriptions of what wildlife was like, even in the early 19th century, these huge populations, we forget that. And now what we have is a tiny fraction of what we had even 50, 60 years ago. In that time, however, the animals that we breed to eat have arguably, if you ignore the condition in which most of them are raised, been the successful, the dominant species. They now weigh at any one time twice as much as all of the people and 20 times as much as the wild animals. Cats and horses and dogs, which we largely rear for companionship, occasionally eat, at the top now weigh almost as much as all of the wild animals combined. So what is the solution to this, and why is it so hard? The solution, obviously, is lentils. But why does Jeff Bezos need to give you guys $30 million when we could all just eat lentils? Well, unfortunately, as we discovered in the food strategy, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So there are two ways that you can get people to eat lentils. The first way is you can have government regulation. So you can begin to build in the true cost of meat production and that biodiversity collapse into the cost of the meat that we eat. And it would be great, by the way, as Andrew alluded to, or Andy alluded to, if we stopped giving subsidies for that meat production. So Partha Dasgupta in his Economics of Biodiversity, which I strongly recommend you read, it's 600 pages long, but, and he was asked to make a summary of it by the civil servants, and he refused. He said, no, it's 600 pages. That's the answer. He did grudgingly do a summary, but it's not nearly as good as the 600 pages. But you all being keen students, well, it really is. Every page is fascinating. He estimates that not only, he calls it the invisibility of nature, the reason that we're destroying nature at such a rate is that we are not giving it a cost. We're not building it into the systems that we use to measure human success. In fact, he says, we're giving it a negative cost. We're paying every year $500 billion in subsidies to industries, industrial farming, fishing, and energy companies that are destroying nature. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're destroying it at this rate. So governments definitely, yes, stop the subsidies. But what if they then started building in the costs? One of the pieces of work we did for the food strategy was a large amount of engagement with citizens. What would they accept from government? What did they find tricky? And what was really interesting was, on the health side, people are much more up for government intervention on health than the kind of nanny state, the fear of the nanny state that you hear in the newspapers and amongst politicians. But when we mentioned the idea of government intervening on meat, the rooms would crackle with electricity, and it was clear that there was something incredibly close to some people's identity about meat eating, and they really didn't want the government to go there. This is probably about 30%, like a really significant minority of those groups. And so when you see that politicians never mention meat, you might say that they are cowards, that they should, but I would say of all the things, that the battles they're trying to fight, that one is an incredibly hard one to win, and I can see why they deviate from it. So that is why I think that regulation is a tricky way to move, to shift us. The other is just persuading people to eat lentils. Now that, unfortunately, as someone who set up a fast food restaurant trying to sell more lentils, is incredibly difficult. And people's diets, and I've learned this not just through business, but also through focus groups, people's diets change very, very slowly. And this is why I came to believe in the food strategy that alternative proteins had to be a big part of the solution. There simply isn't any solution to the simultaneous equation that balances food production, environment, and climate that does not have alternative protein at its center. We actually made a recommendation that the government set up one of these hubs. I hadn't expected it would be Jeff Bezos who would come to the call rather than the government, but you know, you'll take it where you can get it. And it's not only important, and this is important for our future as a country, it's not only important for the planet, it is really important for our economy. So we are one of the most innovative, particularly in this sector of bioscience, countries in the world. Already we have a third of all of the alternative protein companies in Europe are based here. We are third in the world after the US and Israel in terms of alternative protein. But we lack this kind of central hub that countries like the Netherlands, like Canada, have put into place. I hope on regulation, which is the other big stumbling block where Europe are behind us, you are about to see, and I have reason to believe this, an opening up of that with this government, which has made some interesting things that haven't, because of PERDA, been announced, but also with the new one. And therefore, I think that that combination of this hub, a government that understands this is both an economic and a planetary critical path mission, we should be able to achieve something. I want to finish by saying just two things. Firstly, meat 1.0, alternative protein 1.0. Why did that go wrong? People put all these billions of 18 billion pounds into it. For those of you who are going to end up working in this research centre, there is something that any restaurateur will tell you, anyone who's worked in food, which is really difficult to persuade people to eat things that taste less good and are more expensive. So, like, that is just quite hard. And over the course of the last, that is basically what it has been. So you have converted, they've converted people for whom politically this is critical path, but they haven't cracked that problem. I think it will begin to happen now. It's happening in pet food because cats who need to eat meat are less fussy than humans about the taste of meat in their food. I think it will happen in powdered milk. Why on earth would you put water and grass through a large, heavy ruminant and then boil its milk down to a powder? 60% of the milk that China imports is powdered milk. It'll happen there. It'll happen in yolk, powdered yolk. So avian flu is creating absolute havoc with egg supply chains, and then it will gradually move up the stream. But 57% of the food we eat in this country is processed, ultra-processed. That is bad in one way, but I see it as an opportunity. 60% of the meat we eat is eaten in the form of mince. And so I think we are, meat, alternative protein 1.0 is behind us now. There is a huge future for alternative protein 2.0. And for those of you who are going to work in this area, I wish you luck. It is not just the planet, but our economy that relies on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Well, not just for your brilliant words there, but for the amazing strategy and for being such a vocal advocate for sustainability in food in particular. So we're going to move on to the panel discussion. So I would like to invite my panel members to join me. I'm going to sit on the end here. Keep an eye on you. So just for the audience, the way this is going to work, we've asked the panel members each to prepare just a few thoughts as an initial provocation, I guess, and scene setting. Then we'll have a bit of a conversation. There'll be time for audience questions at the end. We've got about 40 minutes, which will go in the blink of an eye. So we might be a bit flexible with the end time if it's a really exciting conversation. Right. So I'm going to start with Julia Brown. Would you like to, well, first of all, introduce yourself to the room and then maybe just spend a few minutes with setting some context and your perspectives in this space.
Hello, I'm Julia King. I sit in the House of Lords as a crossbench peer, which is why I'm called Baroness Brown of Cambridge. I was actually Dean of Engineering here many, many years ago, so I do know what a bright and innovative place this is. Since the Committee on Climate Change started, I've been a member of it in some way. I was its vice chair for many years, and I now chair its adaptation committee. And I also chair the House of Lords Science and Technology Select Committee. And when the election was called, we were halfway through an inquiry into engineering biology and how it's supported in the UK. And in theory, we start again with a clean sheet of paper after the election, and we might even be a new committee, but in practice, I think we'll probably be a very similar committee, and we will hopefully pick up where we left off. So I'm sure you will feature in our, in our inquiry as a new development that will be exciting for us to include. I'd like to just give a bit of a quick UK perspective from a climate change perspective on the importance of alternative proteins, actually. We are in this country a country that imports somewhere around 50% of our food, more in terms of fruits and fresh vegetables. But so, you know, that's quite a lot of food that we produce in the UK. And in the 6th carbon budget, which is our legislated budget for CO2 equivalent emissions that takes us out to 2037, it's now nearly 5 years old, the work for that, because the team in the Committee on Climate Change are now preparing the 7th carbon budget, which will take us out to 2042. But the 6th carbon budget advice provides a pathway to 2037 and indeed on to 2050 about what we need to do to decarbonise our economy. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, in terms of agriculture, in order to meet our 6th carbon budget, 9% of the land we currently use for agriculture will be needed to be used for other actions to reduce emissions. So things like planting trees and potentially growing bioenergy crops. And by 2050, 21% of the land we currently use for agriculture will need to be freed up for growing more trees to sequester carbon, to preserve the peat. So East Anglia, where I live, we have a lot of lowland peat. Some of that is still high quality, is sort of 100 centimetres or so deep. Sadly, not so much of it, and sadly it's disappearing at about a centimetre a year. That's a huge contributor to emissions. We've got to stop doing that, so we need to free up some of that land in order to preserve that peat. The co-benefits, well, Henry's told you about some of those, could potentially be improved health, improved recreation, improved air quality, flood alleviation, and indeed improved energy security if we grow those bioenergy crops. So there's lots of benefits of doing this, but it's a huge challenge, and it needs actions to reduce emissions from agriculture. So things like reducing fertilizer, things like reducing, as we've heard, the number of cattle we have. It needs actions to free up land for energy and carbon sequestration, as I've already mentioned. And alongside that, we need to at least maintain the percentage of the food that we produce in the UK. So we need more productive crops, so crops that have higher nutritional value. We're going to need healthy soils, and that protein intensity in our crops is going to be really, really crucial. So in the UK, if we look at agriculture in the Climate Change Committee context, it's only 10% of UK emissions. Well, it was in 2018 when the 6th carbon budget was done. But that's agriculture that stops at the field level. That doesn't include the food processing, the transport to the supermarkets, all of those other emissions. So it'll be considerably higher than that if you look at it through a different lens. So that's about 10% of emissions then was about 55 megatons of CO2 equivalent. And we can put in place low carbon farming practices, things like cover crops, things like waste and manure management. That might reduce it by 4 megatons. That's not a very big dent. Livestock diets and breeding also contribute to that. We can reduce the fossil fuel use on farms. That might get us 2 megatons. We can release land by a 20% shift from meat and dairy by 2030 and another 15% away from meat by 2050. Actually, that's the biggest single thing we can do to reduce emissions from agriculture. So finding something to replace the meat and dairy with to keep people happy, for the reasons that Henry has talked to us about, is absolutely crucial. Because although the Climate Assembly said that they thought that 20 to 40% reduction in meat and dairy consumption by 2050 would probably be acceptable, and the sixth carbon budget has that kind of 32%-ish move away from meat and dairy by 2050. People say that when they're thinking rationally, but when they read the Daily Mail, you suddenly discover they don't think that at all. And it is, as Henry said, a hugely emotive issue. So that 20 to 30% shift away from meat and dairy that we're going to need is actually probably the most difficult thing any government will do. So actually providing these alternatives that give people the same enjoyment that, or the same feeling that they get at the moment is going to be crucial. Of course, there are other important things like reducing food waste, the improvements in crop yields, growing higher protein crops, increasing the stocking density for cattle and things, and indeed maybe even moving some horticulture indoors with vertical farming. But even if we do all that, it only reduces our emissions from agriculture by something under 50%. So actually, releasing that land in order to plant trees and grow bioenergy crops is an absolutely crucial part of, and also to restore the peat, is an absolutely crucial part of what we need to do. So that's really what I had to say, just to say how important this is. Because the alternatives to releasing that land for natural sequestration of carbon through restoring the peat, through bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, through being able to grow those new forests and woodlands, the alternatives to that are things like lots of direct air capture, hugely energy intensive, pretty unsightly. If you don't like the idea of transmission pylons, I don't think you're going to like the idea of big direct air capture plants being built near where you live. The more we can do this with nature-based solutions, the better it will be for all of us, and the nicer the country we will live in. And if we can do that, it changes our tree cover in the UK from about 13% today to 18% by 2050. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but actually it's a huge transformation and makes so much more green space available for future generations, and indeed for a few more of those animals that we're getting rather short of. And then, of course, we have to remember that we have to do all this in the face of the changing climate. So we have to do all this whilst adapting. So we have to recognize that we'll be seeing higher temperatures, we'll be seeing both drought, particularly at something we're seeing a lot of in East Anglia, but also floods which erode the surface of the soil, particularly when we get increasing bursts of very, very heavy rainfall. And of course, around our coast with sea level rise and the challenges of salt contamination of fields around the coast. So it's a huge challenge, but actually one of the biggest pieces of this challenge is this one of providing a substitute for meat and dairy. So hugely important and very exciting to see this centre starting.
Thank you. I'm not going to come to you next. I'm going to wait till the end and you can tell us about the centre's response. So, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. And of course, a big congratulations to everyone here for this fantastic achievement. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Jochems. I'm the Managing Director of Marlowe Ingredients, one of the business units of Quorn Foods. And just from the people who have spoken before me, I don't think it's any longer a debate that we need to change the way we eat. We need to change the way we feed the world. And actually, that's really, really core to the purpose of Quorn Foods, which stands for healthy food for people and planet. And it was actually, its journey started somewhere in the 60s, actually to find a solution to food scarcity in light of a growing population. And that solution was found in something called mycoprotein, which I think, just like lentils, is a fantastic solution. But it was found in mycoprotein, which is the core ingredient of the Quorn branded products today. Now, why is it fantastic? It's a fungus that, when grown in the right way, actually turns abundant starches into really high quality proteins. It's healthy, it's sustainable, it's nutritious, and importantly, it's scalable. So that's why it's actually a really relevant solution to the multitude of food crises we're facing today. Now, I want to talk to you about how do we accelerate this journey to sustainable or alternative proteins. And I could talk to you about policy, education, habits, but I actually want to do it through the lens of the learnings I've had working in an alternative proteins business for the last couple of years. And actually, what I want to talk to you about are three key things. One is, I think we need to change the way we talk about sustainable proteins. The second one is, we have to meet the 4 key prerequisites that consumers and customers demand of us. The third one is, when we innovate, we have to innovate through a commercialization lens. So let me touch upon these three. The first one being how we talk about alternative proteins. Now, Corn Foods, arguably being the pioneer of alternative proteins, I would argue is a little bit responsible for that jargon. But as was mentioned earlier, we don't talk about alternative energy, do we? We talk about green energy or renewable energy. And I think there's actually an opportunity there to make it so much clearer for consumers to understand what they are choosing, why they are choosing it, to feel really good about that. So in short, I would argue it's time for us to stop being the alternative and start being the first choice, the right choice for consumers to make in their dietary choices. The second thing I want to talk about is meeting all of these 4 key prerequisites. And Henry talked about it a little bit. But any food that we bring to the market, it has to be delicious. It needs to taste good. It needs to be for the right price point for consumers, ideally parity with meat. It needs to be nutritious, and it needs to be sustainable. Now, I've very deliberately sequenced them in that order because I think that is how consumers actually make their choices. Sustainability, I would argue for us, it's a prerequisite, right? It's what we need to do. It's the bigger problem we need to solve. Nutrition, in some cases, falls into that category as well. Consumers make their choices on does the food taste good? Do they love what they're eating? Will they buy it again for the right price point? And that is where I think this center can be so incredibly relevant in tackling that combination of challenges with one solution. Finally, innovate through a commercialization lens. Now, why do I mention this? For the best part of 40 years, mycoprotein has only been available in the corn branded products. About 1.5 years ago, as a business, we embarked on a journey of starting a new business unit, making mycoprotein available actually to customers, to partners, as an ingredient. Now, why did we do this? Again, as part of that journey to want to accelerate the transition to sustainable foods. The beauty is what this brought us, we've been a business innovating for decades. What this new commercialization lens of working with different customers, different partners, has brought us is awareness of a whole different set of challenges, consumer problems to be solved. And actually taking in that lens has tremendously accelerated and focused our innovation agenda. Examples are, we don't only look at meat alternatives, right? We look at many other types of food that could be so relevant for consumers today. And again, it might sound extremely obvious, but it's fantastic to innovate, but if you've got a fantastic solution that's waiting for a problem to be solved, it's not going to bring us much. We really need to look at what are the pain points in the market, what are the asks, what are consumers wanting, what do customers want, how do we innovate to solve those problems and bring that to market. So I'll conclude with that, just to say I'm very excited about what the center can bring, because I think with the brains in this room, with the agenda that is there, I think you're fantastically placed to work on all 3 of those topics, which is really, lead the narrative. How do we talk about our sustainable proteins, ensuring we meet all of the key prerequisites, and finally also innovating through a commercialization lens. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, follow that.
Thank you. Well, a bit difficult to follow all of the speeches, but thank you very much. My name is Alan Dangour. I am the Director of Climate and Health, the strategic program of Climate and Health at the Wellcome Trust. I started the Wellcome Trust in January 2022 after about 20 years at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where I was a Professor of Food and Nutrition for Global Health and the Director of the Centre on Climate Change and Planetary Health. So I'm going to come at it with from a slightly different angle. And that angle is that I think it's hugely important at this critical time, given the huge challenges. You've heard some of those challenges in front of us. The huge challenges facing all of us around the world. It's hugely important that we support science. This, of course, is a world-leading center for science. It's not even remotely surprising that Andrew and his team, in their wisdom, have chosen you. But the bigger point is the support for science. The bigger point that research, social science and basic science and all clinical science, all types of science, are absolutely essential for our ability to respond to the challenges that you've been hearing today. These challenges are vast. And we can't sit here waving our arms around and asking policymakers to make things up without the evidence to shape what those policies are going to look like. It is the case that the UK has a leading place in the global research ecosystem. And frankly, science is one of the crown jewels of the UK. I have to say the absence of strong statements on support for science in most of the manifestos at this critical point in the UK is somewhat disappointing. We support science at Wellcome very strongly. We need science in the UK to drive so many of the challenges, to identify the solutions. So Wellcome supports science to solve these urgent health challenges that face everyone. And I think it's some of these solutions, of course, at the very basic end of science, and some of them are at the downstream end, the more policy end. And I think the questions that are being asked now to science, the questions that are being asked now to academia are different. They are no longer those monodisciplinary, those siloed questions, tell me about your bug, tell me about your cell, tell me about the detail of the issue. Because we've got to ask academia to think differently because the challenges are now so vast. We can't pretend that we're not heading to a very dangerous future because of climate change. And therefore, the solutions that we need to find need to cut across from the basic biology all the way through using a transdisciplinary approach to deliver evidence that can shape policy and have impact in real time with urgency. We must continue to support the basic science that is needed, but we must also pivot the way we deliver science and deliver research in order to have more impact at the national level. And it's really exciting to see a centre such as this, which seeks to do exactly that, to say, all right, here are the basic science questions, here are some basic science we can answer, but we're doing this, basic science questions we can answer, but we're doing this for the purpose of meeting this huge global challenge. And the exciting opportunities lie, as others have said, at those intersections of disciplines. There was a very famous evolutionary biologist called Darcy Wentworth Thompson, who wrote a superb book. You want a long book to read. He wrote a superb book in the early 1900s called On Growth and Form. It's about 500 pages long. It's absolutely stunning. And he was a biologist and a mathematician. And the book is full of both maths and biology. And it talks about the innovation that you find at the borderlands between existing disciplines. And that's exactly where we are, those borderlands. So I lead our work, as I mentioned, on climate and health. Wellcome has 4 strategic priorities. One of them is discovery science, and the other 3 are a little bit more impact-focused on infectious diseases, on mental health, and on climate and health. It's a really exciting time to be working in this area. And again, it is at that borderlands between the climate science and human health. We look at all sorts of intersections, so the direct impacts of climate change on human health through extreme heat or extreme weather events, and those impacts on human health that are mediated by nature, by ecosystems, and of course the food system is one of them, but infectious diseases is another, mental health is another, and there's a long list. I've been in post for just over 2 years. I hope you've seen some of the messages coming out of Wellcome. Wellcome is a changed organization. Yes, we focus on basic biology, but we also have these really strong areas where we want to have an impact. And And this area of the food system is one of the most complicated because we have to do two things simultaneously. One is significantly reduce the environmental footprint of the food system, which of course we've been discussing today. But the other is realize, as was said a little earlier, that there will be many people on this planet who have very little food to eat already, and as we heard, the yields in many countries are going to be declining of the most important foods. So we have a huge challenge to us, and it is a global challenge, one that recognizes both the urgent need to mitigate greenhouse gases, but also to deliver a healthy and sustainable food system for all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, there was a call to arms, Alan. I agree. So, Rodrigo, over to you. Tell us a little bit about the center.
Sure. I'll introduce myself briefly, and then I'll tell you about the center. So my background is in biotechnology and chemical engineering. I have over 15 years of experience working at the interface of engineering biology and microbial foods and sustainable foods. Actually, I did my PhD at the University of Salamanca in Spain, where I'm from, and it was about producing more sustainable food ingredients, making omega-3 fatty acids, flavor enhancers, and vitamin B2. And now I lead a research group here at Imperial of over 30 talented researchers, many of them here in this room, and they will be in the showcase, so you will have time to talk to them about the exciting projects they're doing. And I also lead the Microbial Food Hub here at Imperial, which will have a lot of synergies with the Bezos Center. And about the center, I will start by sharing with you our vision, and just for accuracy, I'm going to read it to you. So our vision is to accelerate the sustainable protein revolution and transform global food systems, making them more sustainable, healthy, productive, accessible, and resilient. And we plan to achieve that by working in 5 different pillars. The first one is research, the second is translation, the third is education, the fourth is knowledge, and the fifth is network. So for the first one, we have an agenda of research that is open, is innovative, and is responsible in the 3 key types of alternative foods or sustainable foods, which are cultivated meat, plant-based food, and fermentation. And we're going to tackle the challenges that we've been discussing here, in particular making them sustainable, making them of high quality, and by high quality, I not only mean taste and texture, but also health and nutrition, and making them also affordable, so they can be accessible to everyone, everywhere. And apart from this, working in those applied research projects, making products, we're also going to develop facilities. There are capabilities here at Imperial and in partner universities that other people and people from the center can access and use to accelerate their R&D programs. The second pillar is about translation. We want to make sure that the research we do doesn't end up in the lab and in a publication, but it's actually translated to the real world and is commercialized in the end. So we're going to do that by working closely with industry, by listening to industrial needs and responding to what they are asking to. And we are open to any company interested in this field to come and talk to us and see if we can work together. We also have a clear strategy for creating startups in this space and supporting those startups, and also to manage the IP that is generated and being able to license it openly so we can make an impact. The third pillar of the center is about education. This is really important for us at Imperial because we are one of the top universities. We take education seriously. And something that we and many others have realized is that there are not really educational programs specialized in sustainable food or sustainable proteins. And on the contrary, there is a huge demand for this, and we can see this in our students year by year, how they want to be part of this food revolution. And thanks to the Bezos Center, we're going to create these programs. We're going to have undergraduate modules, master programs, and dedicated PhD training programs as well. The fourth pillar is about knowledge. We see ourselves as a knowledge hub, and this is because we are bringing together to the same space all the stakeholders in this space. We mentioned multidisciplinarity before and how important that is. So this is truly multidisciplinary. And that is going to give us a high-profile, respected, and evidence-based voice that is going to help us achieve our ambition, which is becoming the place to go for anything sustainable protein, sustainable food related. The last one, the fifth one, is about network. We're going to lead an inclusive European network in the sustainable protein field, and we're going to make this international by working with the other Bezos centers out there around the world and other partners, institutions, including colleagues in the Global South. We will be also partnering with already existing networks, such as Alternative Protein Associations, InBioVita, Bridge to Foods, or the EIT Food. So those are the key pillars we work on, but something that I also think is a great asset, if not the best asset of the center, is the people, the team, the researchers and professionals that are going to make this happen. And sadly, I don't have time to name them all and tell you how great they are, but you will be able to see their profile on the website at some point soon. What I can tell you today is that you can join this team because we are hiring. So, we are looking for managers, including a center manager. We are looking for academics, from lecturers to professors. We are looking for researchers, PhDs, and postdocs. So if this is of interest, please apply. If you know someone who might be interested, please let them know. The first job ads will be out in the coming days in our Imperial Jobs website, and I will also repost them on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. That's it.
Great. So you've heard the call. So I'm going to come to the audience for some questions in a minute. If you're listening online, you can also enter your question, and we can read it out here in the room. But I've just got a couple of, I guess, follow-ups, picking up on some of the themes earlier. And maybe I'll come to you first, Julia. I guess we've talked about the challenge. We've talked a little bit about sort of the market. But what do you really think is the role for government in terms of policy regulation in this space to achieve a transition? And will they do it? You might not be able to answer the second one, but what should they do?
Well, there's a huge role for government. I mean, most governments, and certainly governments in Europe, have enormous amounts of agricultural policy and indeed put enormous amounts of subsidy into the agricultural system, as I think Henry mentioned in his keynote speech. And, you know, we have the opportunity in this country where we're replacing the common agricultural support to farmers with the environmental land management system. Sadly, the development of that hasn't got as far as one might have hoped, and it hasn't actually been as focused on environmental land management as we might have hoped. But I think, you know, we still have the opportunity to make sure that farmers know that they have support for the long term to change, to do the right things. And the right things are, you know, freeing up land, reducing the number of cattle, making sure they're supporting the move to different types of more cost-effective and more nature-effective types of protein for feeding people. So, you know, so the governments have these huge levers to
And if I ask you to think about maybe a carbon tax on
Sorry?
If you were to think about a carbon tax, we often talk about carbon taxes when we think about aviation or transport.
Well, then, of course, you've got the levers to persuade consumers, which range from education, as you say, right through to tax. So they're the slow and the subtle through to the brutal. And in that journey, you've also got things like labelling and regulation and other things that come along that path. And I think we probably need to use all of them. In fact, we already have lots of carbon taxes, you know, things like fuel duty. They don't tend to be called carbon tax, they're called other things. But yes, they definitely need to use all the levers we've got.
Okay, good. Stephanie, it seems like as a consumer, there was virtually nothing in the market, and then suddenly a plethora of new proteins. What does that tell us about, I guess, the citizens' readiness to accept new foodstuffs? What's the actual percentage of meat replacement that's being consumed, and what are the, I guess, the behavioural and cultural barriers? I mean, we talked about taste and affordability, but food is culturally embedded, and that's different in different countries. How do we, I guess, think about the behavioural changes that we need to elicit there? I realize that's actually 5 questions in one.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
The broad space.
There's a few questions in there indeed, right? Which is, how do we think about, you know, the barriers and what needs to change? And I think I've talked a little bit about some of the 4 key things, you know, that the food needs to meet. I won't repeat that. I think what you're touching upon as well is this cultural element. And I think it was touched upon by some of the speakers before me, which was really this element of meat or traditionally farmed products are really parts of the culture of many people. I mean, even I grew up learning, you eat meat with veg, with some potato. And I think that is the case in many cultures. In some cultures, it's aspirational as well. So I think that then comes to education, again, really ensuring that we provide people with the tools to make decisions. And that's that's really up to us here to ensure they have the right information to make informed decisions, but also offering them choices, because not every solution is right for every consumer. So I think really that diversity of protein options or of food options so that people can make the choices that fit for them, I think is really important there. Maybe you touched a little bit upon what has changed, right? There seems to be this multitude of options out there. And I think, to me, what is interesting there, I was at a conference not long ago, and someone told me 20 years ago when they were at a conference, that person was a vegetarian. They would have to justify that they were a vegetarian. It was a bit of almost a dirty word there. And they said that at that point, they explained to people they were vegetarian, and people were sort of apologizing to him, justifying why they weren't or why they were a flexitarian. So I think that shows awareness has significantly shifted on this. I think it's gone from people who chose it in the past, maybe did it for health or animal welfare. Sustainability has come into the mix. Celebrities have helped. Lewis Hamilton, Billie Eilish coming out with their dietary choices and the reasons for that. Mainstream food brands, Greg's, KFC, who have gone out with vegetarian products, all of that has helped. I think then from that, a lot of brands picked up, right? If you look, I think, in 21, I believe about 8 brands were part of mainstream TV advertising, meat-free brands. That is a lot more than 10 years ago, clearly. So I think all of these things are driving and helping to really to pick up that momentum. Having said that, I would argue we're not mainstream enough yet, and I think that was one of your other 5 questions in one, and then I'll stop. Which is, if we look at it, more than half of the UK population has never consumed a meat-free product. And of the half that have, a lot of them have only done this very sporadically. So we need to ensure, how does this become part of the weekly shopping basket? So there's a lot of work for us to do still.
Okay. Alan, I'm just going to give you one question.
Oh.
Maybe. I guess just thinking a little bit more about kind of, in your role at Wellcome, you're thinking about the connection between climate and health, and this is kind of impacted from both sides. But what I want to think about is the broader health equity piece, and where you see this fit, and I guess what is Wellcome doing in this space? How do you think we can, apart from the nutrition piece, because there's a broader than the nutrition of the product, through to, I guess, global health as well as global sustainability?
Yeah, really nice question. Thank you for that, actually. So Wellcome has a very strong statement on EDI, so equity, diversity, and inclusion. We are determined that we should be delivering science that's useful for all and can deliver health outcomes that are globally relevant. I think here there's a particular danger of generating evidence which is most useful to a relatively small demographic. So we've just heard from Stephanie that relatively small numbers of people in the UK eat these products at the moment. So there's a huge amount of work to be done there. So the team that I used to be very pleased to work with at the London schools, this is biased. There are, of course, other research groups out there. We have to have balance. That team, led by Pauline Schilbeck at the moment on this piece of work, really focusing on who is it that's eating and what are the opportunities to shift dietary patterns. So vegans and vegetarians, they may well be eating a lot of these products, but we want to start encouraging those people who want to start eating more of these alternative proteins and alternative foods to do it more regularly. At the moment, it tends to be younger people. It tends to be, below 40 certainly, richer people and people who don't have children. So typically, not having children helps with the richer bit. But still, it is a relatively small sector segment of society that is currently consuming these foods. And part of that is because we have not done a very good job. We, academia and the general community, has not done a particularly good job in making the case. So there's a lovely review published about a month ago in in Nutrition Reviews on the health and environmental benefits of many of these foods, showing that it's a bit mixed. Some of these foods are really, they might be low in animal source foods, but they're really bad for you. You know? So, you know, and others, you know, but they might have a strong environmental footprint and all of that. So we do have to help, as Stephanie says, we have to help educate, but we also have to produce better products, which both hit all of those points that Stephanie just raised. You know, they need to be healthy and environmentally friendly, and and tasty and a good price point and something you want to eat. And you know, there's an and. And this is a big long list of things, but we really need to start focusing on that to give the community people a much better choice. And there's a very big, just my final point. There's a very big. We've got to be careful that we're not just talking to the same people. Yeah. So are we having these conversations in some of the poorer parts of the country, amongst some of the poorer communities? So the equity point is really, really, really important, and I'm not sure we've tackled that properly yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, it's your chance to ask some questions. Anybody? Are you everyone down here at the front? Please wait for the microphone. We might hear you in the room. Oh, you've got the microphone. You've got a microphone. But in general, we might hear you, but the people online won't. And please introduce yourself as well before you ask the question.
Sat right in front of the microphone. How exciting. So I heard from Andrew Steer. Sir Andrew, congratulations. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce Friedrich from the Good Food Institute. And Sir Andrew talked about meat consumption going up 200% by 2050. It's up 70% in the last 26 years. It's just a steady global uptick. So I think that underlines what Henry Dimbleby and others said, that the current straight education is not working, which I think is why it's so exciting that we're at plant-based and cultivated meat 2.0 instead of 1.0. I think, again, Sir Andrew, you sounded a lot like Jeremiah talking about if this doesn't work, forests are going to be burned down, we're not going to meet climate goals, et cetera. What I heard was we need to not make this about education and not make this about talking to people, but we need the equity piece baked in by making the products that everybody likes. And sort of like with EVs, if there is no charging infrastructure and the battery range is 115 kilometers, nobody's going to buy them. So the solution is not convince people to buy the products that have that don't have the right battery range or a charging infrastructure. The solution is make better products, and I think that's what Imperial is focused on. One thing I'd like to hear, Alan, from you about a little bit. We talked about climate, we talked about nature, we talked about deforestation. Right now, 70% of medically relevant antibiotics are fed to farm animals, which is driving antibiotic resistance, which a UK government report says is a more certain risk to humanity even than climate change. Again, we're up 70% in 26 years. Prediction is 100% by 2050. The current solutions aren't working. And then there's something similar happening with climate. The International Livestock Research Institute and UNEP released a report. They said of the 7 most likely causes of the next pandemic, the first one is more animal products. And the second one is industrial animal farming, because these animals are basically genetic clones. So I guess 2 questions. One of them is consumer choice. Is this about consumer choice, or is this about changing the products rather than consumer choice, which feels like the failed strategy of the last 50 years? And then especially for Alan, how do you think about pandemic and antimicrobial risk and skyrocketing meat consumption, which seems like something that is on par with climate change and nature to me?
I think it was a question for you.
Well, part of it was for me.
I'm just going to say something. I didn't hear a mutual exclusion between education and choice.
No, nor did I. But thanks for raising that. That's a really, so obviously all of these things, look, old Jeremiah in the corner there is dead right. you know, we are heading to a very dangerous place, and I think we need to take it very seriously. And I think we need to throw everything we possibly can at this finding the solutions. It's an awful lot about education. It's an awful lot about producing the right products. It's an awful lot about equity. It's about putting them in the right place at the right time. And, you know, there is so much that needs to change. That great transformation that Henry talked about absolutely needs to happen. Yeah? And it's only going to happen if the whole of society takes part in various different ways. So I think I didn't hear an either or. And in fact, the centre is, you know, was it Pillar 3, which is education? Seems to be right in there. On AMR, Wellcome has a very Wellcome has a new director of infectious disease called Alex Pym, who has very squarely antimicrobial resistance as one of his core areas of research. And I think that if you look at the website and if you speak to Alex directly, there's plenty going on in that space. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a very major risk for all of our health. And the intersection, so what's very exciting about Wellcome having these 3 strategic areas, well, what's very exciting about Wellcome now having a focus that includes climate change is that it is abundantly clear now in the building that much of the research that goes on and is funded by Wellcome has a climate change angle. Yeah? And in fact, I would argue that all of global health should be considering not only its impact on the environment, but also the impact that the climate change is going to have on our ability to resolve those problems. So, you know, so if you talk to Alex, he's completely committed to understanding the role of climate change within infectious diseases. If you talk to Miranda Woolport, she similarly is increasingly interested in the link between climate change and mental health. And similarly, discovery science, there is now an increased interest in answering those questions in discovery science that are uniquely affected by climate change.
Okay, and I would just add 2 things. So Wellcome does fund a centre here between climate change and mental health. And it's it's a superb centre. Almost 100 years since Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin on Imperial St. Mary's campus. So if you would like to hear more about our work in AMR, you should come back to one of our Fleming Initiative activities. We have a question right at the back, and then here. Yeah. Do you want to leave the microphone here, and then we can come second?
Thank you so much. My name's Jenny Chapman. I wrote a report about ultra-processed food and plant-based meat. I'm really interested in the levels of misinformation and disinformation surrounding alternative proteins. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what can be done here.
Great question.
Great question.
Should we take a few?
Yeah. Should we take a couple? Do you want to take another question here, and then we'll see who wants to answer them? Is there one? We'll take a couple of questions, and then come back.
Sonali Kuching from Reading Scientific Services Limited, research partner over there in food R&D. We've talked a lot about the prerequisites, and we've talked a lot about funding impact. So my question to you collectively would be, how are we planning on measuring impact from the centre, especially, as well as generally from in the alternative protein space globally?
Okay. Let's take one more, and then we'll give the panel. So the gentleman in the tie first, and then we'll come back.
My name's Jack Bobo, Director of the Food Systems Institute, University of Nottingham. You've talked a lot about change. I think people love innovation almost as much as they despise change, and they don't despise change any more than in the food they eat. So I think that's a challenge, just the nature of the conversation. Second point would be that most people won't change what they eat to save their lives. Why do we think they'll change what they eat to save the planet? So it's this question of communication that Stephanie raised, and how do we change the nature of the conversation? Because too often when we have these conversations, it actually polarizes the audience. Those who agree with you more, but often those who disagree end up disagreeing more, and it makes us harder to achieve the change that we need.
Okay, so I'm going to give each of the panelists a chance to answer any or all of those questions. So we had a question about how do we challenge the misinformation question, how are we going to measure impact, and this kind of polarization of debate. How do we get over that?
I can answer.
Do you want to go first, Rodrigo?
I can answer the one about how we plan to measure impact in the center, and I just give you a glimpse on that, because we have a whole bunch of pages about how the metrics we're going to use. But for example, in research, of course, we want to see publications that are open access, that everybody can read and learn from that. We want to see those having high impact on citations and all that. But we also want to see those technologies describing that publication to be taken by industry and used by regulators as well. We want to see our students that are going to start this educational program to actually work in the space afterwards. And we want to see jobs being created out of the startups we're going to have and out of the technology we're going to develop and so on as well. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the knowledge and network aspect, we're gonna monitor like how people engage, how society react to information that we're gonna deliver, and so on. So looking at consumer insight and how it changes over time in the things that are related to the center activities.
Okay, I can build on it a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe to the first question about the information on nutrition, information, disinformation, I think you mentioned. Look, what I think is really important is that we need to do the scientific studies on the nutritional impact benefits of the food. I think with mycoprotein, we've had the benefit, we've been around for decades, and we've been able to do decades of studies on nutritional benefits in partnerships with different universities, no strings attached. I think that's really going to be a job for any protein that comes out there, any of these that comes out of here, to really be able to show what are the health benefits of that. And again, that is then about really informing consumers, then fact-based, but being able to communicate it in an easy-to-understand manner, of course. So I think that would be, for me, the big thing to do there. Maybe to the third point, I think it was, which was this element of how do we ensure it doesn't become a polarizing debate? And I think that's a very good and fair comment. And what I'm trying to say here is almost we need to stop being the alternative, but being part of the spectrum of choices for consumers, so that it doesn't become this or that, just this, or this is good, this is bad. We just need to be able to ensure that we've got enough choices for consumers to be able to feel good about the choices they make and pick different types of foods. But I think the exact wording we choose in that debate is really relevant. You're very right.
Julia, anything to add?
Just on that communication issues, it is very important who does the communication, I think. I was very surprised by a piece of research I saw the other day, which actually said that if your doctor's surgery issued a flood warning, you would be much more likely to take notice of it. So it does seem to me that actually, although people don't necessarily all change their diet for their health, I do think we should get medics more engaged in persuading people that this is a really good direction to go in, and moving away from all of this animal protein is a helpful and healthy thing to do. And if your GP said it to you, I think it might have more effect certainly than if politicians try telling you.
Interesting. Any questions online?
We have almost 40 questions submitted
Well,
online.
which your favorite question from online?
We have one from Craig, which is, how can policymakers play a role in encouraging the transition to sustainable proteins?
So we already asked Julia a similar question, maybe from a Wellcome perspective.
How can policymakers play a role?
Yeah.
In encouraging the transition to sustainable proteins.
Okay, that's a great question. So I think at the moment, I think Henry's National Food Strategy is a really good example. So I was very fortunate to be, when I was at the London School, to be part of the team that generated some of the evidence that went into the National Food Strategy. That was a monumental task. It was an unbelievably complicated task. As you're all thinking of questions, there are 40 online. This is not a small topic. This is a vast topic. Everyone's got a view, and it gets very heated quite quickly. I've been in some very, very difficult conversations. None, I'm sure, anywhere near as difficult as Henry has. But the reason I mention that is because that was a vast piece of work to generate some novel evidence on what governments might do to tackle this problem. What happened? Nothing. Okay? But the key, with the greatest, obviously, but governments were unwilling, as Henry says, unwilling to take on this challenge because it is such a big thing. But our job as funders of science, but as academics, is to generate that evidence. Otherwise, we are asking policymakers to wave their arms around in the air and make stuff up. Yeah? And it just isn't sensible, it isn't safe, and it isn't what we should be doing in this day and age. We are very happy that the climate and health projects that we support at Wellcome from our team all have a razor focus on why are you doing this piece of work, what piece of policy are you seeking to influence? A razor focus on that, because there is an absolute dearth of evidence on what we should do. There is a dearth of evidence on what actually works in this space, and unless we generate that evidence and provide it to policymakers in a manner in which they can understand and which is palatable and usable, we're wasting our time. We haven't got the time. So I'm absolutely razor focused on that. And so the question about what should policymakers do, they should be asking us. They should be asking academics. They should be shaping the questions that we answer so that we can generate the evidence that they need.
Okay, and going slightly off piste, I'm going to let Henry come in on that question.
Just in case there's a politician listening. So there are three things that you can do if you're a politician listening. One, the government's already doing, and I hope the next government will continue to do, which is stop paying people to destroy nature and start paying for public goods. Yep. And that part of the food strategy they embraced wholeheartedly. The second thing is, which Liz Truss didn't do, is we are the fourth biggest importer of food in the world, and therefore if you put in place trade deals that require other countries to meet your standards when you import them, you can have a big effect abroad. Yep. And the third thing is much quicker legislation on alternative proteins. It's still really stuck in the FSA, and that needs to change. So I hope this is Steve Reed, the soon-to-be Secretary of State of DEFRA, listening, and those are the three things you need to do.
Right, and on that note, I think it is time to, please join me in thanking the panel. I know we've got 40 at least online, many more in the room questions we could have had, but thank you. And thank you all for joining us here today, and those of you who joined in online. For those of you in the room, there is a networking reception, and there's also going to be a showcase of some of the activities, so please join us to celebrate the launch. Maybe we'll be back here in 5 years' time to see what good looks like, Rodrigo. Thank you very much. Good job, everyone.